If folks could take seats, if you can find seats. Hi all, welcome. Great, thank you so much. Welcome everybody. For those that don't know me, my name is Ben Dibbling, and I'm the Managing Director of the Penn Center for Innovation. It's wonderful to be here today, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to welcome so many alumni, colleagues, collaborators, and friends of Penn to what is our ninth annual Innovation at Penn event at Wharton, San Francisco. I'm also joined here with other colleagues from PCI. We have Laurie Ackman, who's PCI's Chief Marketing, Communications and Programs Officer, and Sam Cervello from her team. Carter Caldwell, who directs the Penn Medicine Co-Investment Program. Bhavana Mohan Raj, who's Interim Executive Director for our Ventures team, and her colleague Melissa Lopez. And Jim Bowen, who's the Executive Director of our Corporate Alliances team. In addition, we also have John Swartley, who up until about a year ago was the Managing Director of the Penn Center for Innovation before being promoted to Penn's inaugural Chief Innovation Officer. I also see that we have Dr. Epstein in the audience, so a warm welcome to him, who's Penn's Interim Executive Vice President for the University of Pennsylvania Health System and Dean of the Perelman School of Medicine. So for those who don't know about the Penn Center for Innovation, or PCI, our team's focused on identifying and implementing relationships with the commercial sector to facilitate the development of new products and services, and to establish new ventures, in each case based on inventions and discoveries generated by Penn's outstanding faculty and research scientists. Whether the end result is a new venture, a corporate alliance, a license agreement, or sponsored research, PCI serves as a one-stop shop for industry to engage with Penn. So PCI actually celebrated its 10-year anniversary last year, and our accomplishments over this period are truly impressive. Penn has advanced from 24th to first place in the national rankings by annual licensing income. PCI has executed over 7,000 commercialization agreements during this period, facilitated over $1 billion in sponsored research funded, and supported the formation of more than 300 startup companies based on Penn technologies and expertise. And the success of PCI can be attributed to many things, but this includes Penn's strategic vision that included a focus on impact and innovation, and an appreciation of the importance of engagement with the commercial sector. And this was initiated by many leaders and faculty across Penn and led by former President Amy Gutmann. That said, I don't think we would have been as successful as we have been without the amazing team at PCI and John Swartley's steadfast leadership. So back to the event today. Each year, I have to acknowledge that we're really spoiled for choice at Penn when it comes to selecting both a topic relevant to the attendees at this conference and the individuals that we invite to participate in the panel. Today's panel, as you know, is focused on the intersection of artificial intelligence and healthcare innovation. Obviously, AI has the potential to revolutionize how we prevent and diagnose disease, how we deliver healthcare to improve patient outcome, and how we develop drugs. And we didn't want this to be just another discussion around AI, but Penn's very fortunate to have unique leaders and opportunities in the realm of AI and healthcare, so you're in for a real treat this afternoon. I'd like to introduce our moderator today, Roy Rosin, who's board partner with First Round Capital, a seed stage venture fund based in Philadelphia. I know Roy well, since before joining First Round, Roy spent 12 years as Penn Medicine's Chief Innovation Officer, where his team had the opportunity to design, test, and implement around 150 technology-enabled interventions across a broad spectrum of care delivery. And he worked closely with PCI to support faculty entrepreneurs. Before moving back east, Roy started his career in the Bay Area as a product manager on Quicken at Intuit after getting his MBA at Stanford. Roy brings a true passion for solving problems of all kinds, has a deep knowledge of the startup process, and just has a talent for making things happen. Roy, thank you so much for joining us to moderate this discussion. And finally, before I hand over, just a really big thank you to Laurie Ackman and her team for putting on this event together with Ward in San Francisco, who allow us to host the event each year in this beautiful space. And obviously to our sponsor, the law firm Sal Ewing. And with that said, I'll hand over to Roy. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ben. So it's really delightful to be here. My journey with data science actually started in 1987, and it was really just regression analysis then. But I found I was able to win NFL bets against the spread 81% of the time. That got me pretty interested as a student about what you could do in extracting value from data. But if you fast forward many decades, I found myself surrounded by these extraordinary people, like the ones I'm lucky enough to be on stage with today, who are really advancing not only the science, but the application of AI as well. And in all kind of areas that were just remarkable. It's kind of fun to stop for a minute and sort of trace some of the evolution of, just highlights, because it would be too long a list to go into detail. But I can still remember when I think Ravi Parikh was one of the first ones where we had an outcome, not only great technology, where Ravi's work was able to predict mortality, and you saw this dramatic increase in the appropriate use of palliative care and hospice care, which is really important for end-of-life care. And there would be an evolution from there, things that I hope Walter might talk about in radiology, where you're finding important indications, more of them with precision earlier in the journey, which is so incredibly important. The evolution of conversational agents that maybe Marylyn will talk about, we'll see. We can have these extremely engaging conversations, and engagement numbers of 91, 96% of people giving us the information we needed so we can manage symptoms and side effects in ways we never were able to do before. Retinal imaging, finding things much earlier in the journey of that disease. Drug development across the board, just in drug repurposing, which I hope we hear a little bit more about from David today. It wasn't always smooth sailing, right? I can remember some of the first failures too, especially you get into a world like sepsis, where we had this incredible AI doing sepsis prediction hours and hours and hours earlier with no change in mortality rate. Well, why was there no change in mortality rate if now we had a 10-hour window, we used to only have one? Well, who did what, when, where, and how with this new information we never had before? It's a last mile problem, which I hope we can get into today a little bit as well. When I went to first round capital, the world sort of exploded in front of my eyes in terms of some of the commercial applications of these, from the back office and revenue cycle management, chart review, all kind of things that were going on that I really wasn't deeply in, that we could automate 98, 99, 99.5% of the work. High precision continuous screening across the board, just doing amazing work finding things. The ambient listening world, which is all the rage now in healthcare. Agents everywhere, agents writing letters, agents making calls, agents doing work that humans used to do and doing it faster and cheaper. Summarizing thousands of pages of documentation to the few things that a doctor needed to know for the next best action. So all this work going on across the board everywhere. And it's just exciting because I had sort of sat out some of the recent rounds. I'd sat out cryptocurrency and I'd sat out blockchain, and I had all these startups coming to me saying how excited they were, and I'm like, I don't see it. And now you're sitting there looking at things that I think will fundamentally change the world. So it's exciting to talk about. It's exciting to get to talk to you, this group in particular, about these. And we're going to kind of start by just kind of going down to my left here and have everybody, if I could, starting with you, Marylyn, maybe just start by briefly introducing yourself, your role, and your work. And then we'll get into what you're most excited about after that.
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. My name is Marylyn Ritchie. I'm the Vice Dean for AI and Computing at the Perelman School of Medicine at Penn. I am a PhD in human genetics and a master's in statistics by training. I like to say I've been doing AI since the late 1900s. So my PhD project was using evolutionary computing to build neural networks. No one knew what that was or cared about it back then. So it's been great to see it emerge. And my role as Vice Dean is really working very closely with institutional leadership and the faculty to develop an AI strategy, mostly around research and education, really trying to figure out where is Penn uniquely positioned to make an impact in the field. And then I partner very closely with individuals at the health system to figure out kind of where are they implementing or could they be implementing AI in the clinic, that then we could study and research what is the impact of that AI implementation in the clinic, and then kind of go back into research and figure out how can we optimize that, kind of that last mile problem. How can we kind of be a better learning health system and learn from the care that we're giving and optimize the algorithms and then go back into the clinic and try them again. So really that virtuous cycle between research and clinical work.
Thank you. David.
Thanks so much, Roy. I'm David Fajgenbaum. I'm a physician scientist at Penn. I run a center called the Center for Cytokine Storm Treatment and Laboratory. We do deep immune profiling, and then we look for existing drugs that can be repurposed to treat these inflammatory diseases. This is a very personal topic for me. I personally became very sick with a rare disease called Castleman's when I was in medical school at Penn, and ended up discovering an existing drug called sirolimus that was made for another disease that was able to save my life. And that experience of discovering this drug and repurposing to save my life really set me on a mission to figure out how many more drugs are sitting out there at our neighborhood pharmacies that could be repurposed and could save your life or the life of someone that you love. So since joining the faculty at Penn about 10 years ago, we've been a part of identifying and advancing an additional 13 more repurposed drugs for diseases they weren't intended for, from angiosarcoma to Castleman's to Poem syndrome to DATA2 syndrome. And a couple years ago, decided to really think about doing this at scale. Instead of doing one drug, one disease at a time in the lab like we were doing, to actually utilize the power of artificial intelligence to look across all drugs and all diseases to identify the most promising opportunities to repurpose drugs and advance them forward. And we have developed a new field called computational pharmacophenomics. Any marketing folks in here, if you have any better ideas for a name, I would love it. But we went with computational pharmacophenomics, and it's basically where we look across all drugs, all diseases, and we quantify the repurposing potential to help save lives.
74 million pairs?
74 million.
See, I read the paper.
Right.
I told you I would.
Someone read the paper.
Thanks, David. Walter.
Hi, I'm Walter Witschey. I'm an associate professor of radiology, and I'm associate vice chair of research infrastructure at Penn Medicine. And I spend a lot of my time thinking about deploying artificial intelligence as part of the research infrastructure within radiology at Penn. So I would say AI has had one of the biggest impacts on radiology among all the fields of medicine. If you just look at the number of FDA applications in the field of radiology, more than 70% of, in the field of medicine, more than 70% of them are in radiology. And many of these are already changing clinical care. In my own work, we think a lot about how we can deploy these technologies end to end. So how we can take them and fulfill the last mile promise and make it so that the radiologists aren't even often knowing that they're interacting with an AI. They're just getting results that they need in order to make a clinical care decision. One of the tools that we developed is a tool that analyzes computed tomography images. These tools are vision models, and they look at CT pictures and they pull out information about the patient, such as hepatic steatosis. This tool went live in May of 2024, and since then we've screened over 15,000 patients at Penn Medicine who've had unenhanced CTs looking at hepatic steatosis. Approximately 5 to 7% of those patients do, and so we're finding already that we are able to identify patients quicker and more rapidly and effectively using some of these vision models as deployed in the clinic. Some of my own personal research interests are around explainability, fairness, and precision, and validating these tools in the clinic. I look forward to those conversations.
All right, we're definitely going to get there. Walter, since you have the floor, I'm going to come backwards. I think you guys already said this in your introductions, and I expect you're going to extend it. But I'd like you to get precise about what you're most excited about. And if you could, I would love you to get specific, like how are specific things impacting specific people in specific ways. So if you could add to what are you most excited about with some specific impacts, that would be my next question. So, I remember in your field, Walter, actually, I think radiology, maybe what got me interested, Regina Barzilay, I remember, found her own breast cancer years before her doctors did when she applied her algorithms to her own scans. And I remember thinking at the beginning of the journey how fascinating that was, that you could do computer vision that way. So radiology is fascinating still to me. So what are you most excited about?
The thing I think I'm most excited about is the potential to be able to change the radiology workflow in a way that makes productivity much higher and identifies patients who have disease earlier in their care. For instance, there is a notion called opportunistic screening. Many patients, they go to and they get imaging done for the purpose of abdominal pain, but we can identify using vision models things about the patient that are potentially setting them off for some additional care, and we want to be able to recognize those patients earlier. In terms of the AI that I find the most interesting, vision language models, I think, have the potential to really transform the field of radiology. In particular, the ability to take imaging and then generate explainable information about the pictures for radiologists and non-physicians to be able to understand what's going on with their pictures.
Yeah. And on the end-to-end side, I'm actually surprised I haven't yet seen explainability to the patient of, like, here's my radiology report, and all I want to know is, am I okay, and what do I do next, in plain English. But we'll get there too. All right, David. Now, when I say what are you excited about, give me a 9 out of 10, because when you get to your 10 out of 10, I find I have to get up and dance. So give me a 9 out of 10 on excitement.
I'm so excited about utilizing these AI algorithms to identify drugs for patients that are suffering right now, with drugs that are literally sitting on the pharmacy shelf right now. And so in the last couple years, I've been able to be a part of efforts where we've utilized drugs that are predicted to be effective for a disease and delivered them to patients within days of the prediction. Just last January, had a patient who was actively dying in the intensive care unit in Washington State with a horrible disease called POEM syndrome. We made a prediction on a Friday. I spoke to his doctor on that Saturday. He started on treatment that Monday, and he was able to get off life support. He was able to make it out of the intensive care unit. He actually got a stem cell transplant a few months ago, and he probably is going to live a full life after, literally being, his doctor told him before that, or told his family, the only decision left is whether you want him to die in the hospital or die at home. And we were able to use a drug that's been around for years and was sitting there. Could save his life. So that's what this is all about. We've got 4,000 FDA-approved drugs that are at your neighborhood CVS. We've got 18,000 human diseases, many of which don't have therapies. In fact, the vast majority of which don't have an approved therapy. We have 4,000 approved drugs for about 4,000 diseases, and there's another 14,000 diseases without a single approved therapy. So we should be really proud of the progress we've made in medicine, but we got a long way to go, and that's why we need to keep developing new drugs. But artificial intelligence is so exciting because it can help us to look back to the future and say, what are all these other drugs that we've already developed, and what can we use them moving forward? So the example I shared of Joseph was obviously very powerful and touching, he texts me every couple of weeks, and it's just so amazing. But what I'm actually really excited about, so maybe this is the 10 out of 10, is that when we look across every drug against every disease, all 74 million possibilities, now it's not about what can I do for Joseph with this disease, which may or may not have a good drug waiting for it. But now if I look all versus all, I can say, what is the best opportunity in the whole world to use an existing drug to save lives, to have the greatest impact possible? And that's when it is really exciting. And I won't start to tell you guys about those repurposing opportunities now because I'm going to tell them later. And that I'll get to a 10 out of 10 for sure.
That's definitely worth it. And in your comments, there's so much that I can't wait to explore. I'm glad we have some time here to get into this stuff. But as Walter raised, there is this really interesting element of trust, safety, fairness, et cetera, because even the words you use, we made a prediction. Yeah. But somebody took your prediction and acted on it, which I find fascinating. So we'll get to that, as Walter said as well. So Marylyn, what are you most excited about and why?
Okay. Well, I'm actually going to share one of our faculty members' work rather than my own, because I'm more excited about his project than I am anything happening in my lab, which says something about how awesome this project is, because I love my research. But so his name is Dr. Kevin Johnson. He is a PIK professor at Penn, which means he has an appointment in multiple schools. So he's in the School of Medicine, the School of Engineering, and also the Annenberg School of Communication. So he has a project that actually received an NIH Pioneer Award, which is a really hard grant to get. It's called the Observer Project. So what he's doing is taking recordings, both audio and video, of primary care appointments. He has cameras in the room as well as on the providers and on the patients. And this is all done with consent. So both the providers and the patients are consenting. This is research. But he is recording everything that's happening in that interaction, turning all of that into data that can then be analyzed by AI. So the vision models are analyzing the video. He's turning all of the listening into text. So the ambient listening is converting everything into text. He then has algorithms running on these data to pull out things like the structured information that needs to get entered into the EHR for the visit. So instead of the physician sitting there typing in, have you had any of this? No. Do you report any of that? No. And clicking through Epic, it's creating that structured content that could be just go straight into Epic. It's generating the note, both from the patient perspective and the provider perspective. And then it's analyzing things like the sentiment of the patient, how has their mood changed since their last visit? It's looking at their gait, it's looking at their posture. And I imagine at some point, if we had sensors in the rooms, which in some of our hospitals we do, you could also start to look at their respiratory rates and their brain waves without even touching them. That technology exists now. And so I find that incredibly exciting. So one, from a patient care perspective, when you talk to physicians, they are so burned out with documentation. The whole reason they became doctors is to interact with patients. They want to look at them and talk to them and touch them and make sure they're okay, but they have to sit at the computer. And so the motivation behind this was to get all of that data done kind of automatically so that the physician can just talk to the patient and interact with them. And then all of that would happen behind the scenes, and the physician would then look at it and say, that's right, I agree with that, yep. And there'd be a few clicks instead of spending the whole visit kind of in the EHR. What I love about that for patient care is also the potential for more accuracy. So physicians are incredibly diligent, and they're human, right? We miss things. Would you remember if somebody was sitting up really straight 3 months ago, but today they're kind of withdrawn? No, you're not going to remember that. You're just trying to get to the next patient. So I think that's incredibly exciting, but also as a researcher, one of the things that we do a lot of in my lab is pull data out of the EHR, and it's incredibly messy and dirty, and we have to spend so much time trying to make sense of it. And there's also the human variability. Some physicians code it this way, some code it that way, some write the notes this way, some write it that way. If AI is doing that, it's going to be much more similar and automated and streamlined, and I think it's going to take kind of the research that we do from what I would say is maybe an 8 out of 10 in terms of accuracy to a 10 out of 10. And so I think it's going to transform patient care and put the doctors back into interacting with their patients. And I think it's going to make precision medicine research transformative.
Yeah, as I listen to you, and Kevin, I love working with Kevin. He's a blast. And I had this conversation with him because I would sit and watch doctors at their pajama time, what is going on that they're working all day and then all night. And I remember we had this conversation about if we could only observe everything, and that's what he's doing, everything. It's sort of the extension from ambient listening to ambient sensing, right? And so you're going to see what are the other dimensions that come in when you get past ambient listening, because the ambient listening itself is going to now workflow automation, right? It's not the documentation capture. It's because I have this, what can I do next, and how do I get rid of that downstream? So if that's forward-looking, I'm going to force you to turn around 180 degrees and look back, because my intent in this question is to give people in the room a sense for how fast it's moving, and particularly in your part of the world. We all know it's moving fast. These models are getting more precise. These agents are having capabilities that didn't have months ago. And so you see this change, but how would you express, or how would you describe what wasn't possible 6 months ago or a year ago that is possible now? Just to give people a sense of the pace, of the velocity that we're in the middle of at this point. And I'll stop going left to right to left, just jump up.
Well, maybe I'll start. So I would say about 5 years ago, it was still quite common to develop vision systems in radiology that were rule-based or 100% rule-based and operated on heuristics. They required an engineer working very closely with a clinician to identify a specific set of features they're trying to recognize in the image, codify those features into a set of rules, and then program them as a series of logic statements. So we adopted very quickly vision-based algorithms like convolutional neural networks to be able to solve these types of problems about 5 years ago in radiology. And they've already had a tremendous impact on our work in terms of being able to identify, for instance, an organ size like a liver volume or a brain volume, but looking at a lesion size, number of lesions, tracking lesions over time, and seeing whether there are changes from one scan to the next. These are the types of systems that I think got implemented about 5 years ago. And 1 year ago, a really very impressive thing emerged in the radiology field, and those are the vision language models, the ability for an AI model to convert information contained into an image into text that can be interpreted, like a caption, or the reverse, to take information in a caption and make a picture out of it. That kind of vision language model has been just extraordinary in terms of its ability to improve interpretability and explainability of images. It's been useful for training physicians.
Give me an example there. Like, what's one specific thing of how it did that?
So I'll give maybe a couple examples.
Yeah.
So one thing that can be done that I think is very useful is generating top-level summaries, for instance, of radiology reports. So you're a non-radiologist, but you're reading a radiology report. It would be great to have a top-level summary that describes the most pertinent information from the report, and then merge that with the other information contained in the EHR. So demographic information, maybe other clinical visits that the person has had. And I think what we're about to see is not just, we're all familiar with the fact that these vision language models are incredibly confident in what they say. And I think that's one of the big limitations. And what we're going to begin to see is the ability to communicate uncertainty more in the vision language models. If you are making a prediction, how confident are you in that prediction? Or to what extent do you think that the data doesn't support the traditional inferencing that you would do on
maybe part of that establishing trust that we'll get to. In fact, I'll probably go there next. So David, when I think about what you're doing now, part of me is like, well, what we went from is the absolute inability to do any of that, because it would be like one off. But like, what's the real answer? How do you think about it?
Sure. So about 5 years ago, we were utilizing artificial intelligence to make specific predictions within one disease, oftentimes Castleman disease, for drugs that could be useful for that disease. And we got quite good at that. We've repurposed a number of drugs and saved a bunch of lives, patients all around the world with Castleman disease. And about 3 years ago, as artificial intelligence was really progressing, we started speaking with colleagues all over the country around some of the models that they were utilizing on, in some cases, biomedical knowledge graphs, some cases other data sets. But what we learned is that there was some pretty cool work being done to look across knowledge graphs or any data set to come up with predictions for potential treatments for a given disease. And that's when I started thinking, maybe rather than us just making a prediction for one disease using these amazing tools, what if we could basically repurpose these really cool tools, but to ask simultaneously and in parallel all drugs against all diseases. And our colleagues in computer science at these various groups we're very concerned about the compute power, the ability to do that. But we basically ran it for the first time about 2 years ago. And this is around the time that we launched a nonprofit called Every Cure, which is on a mission to really scale this concept of drug repurposing and to unlock the full potential of each drug for every disease that it possibly can. And so we had a couple colleagues that ran this for the first time. And it took 100 days to run the algorithm the first time. 100 days. This was about 2 years ago. And before we got our results back. And it turns out that first run was really powerful because we've been able to save lives with those results. So it was worth the 100 days. But the most recent time we ran the algorithm, it took 17 hours. And the scores are different. They're better. The metrics are improved. We're getting better and better and better. And the cool thing about running an algorithm that takes 17 hours versus 100 days is you can continue to iterate and improve on it. And the really cool thing about drug repurposing is that when we make a prediction that carfilzomib could be useful for POEM syndrome, we've got someone who's sick with POEM syndrome, we can give them carfilzomib within a couple days, and we can learn whether the carfilzomib helps that patient, and then we can refine our models. Whereas the vast majority of AI in biomedicine is around making predictions around new drugs for new diseases. And we can make a great prediction, which might be a really great molecule, but we're not going to be testing that in people for a couple of years at the soonest. And so we're going to start improving these algorithms after 3, 4, 5 years of a cycle, as opposed to 3 or 4 or 5 days.
Yeah, I can't help it. I wasn't going to ask this now, but I have to. So I was listening to all these chief scientific officers. I told you this the other night, who all were saying, oh, all this drug development is amazing. We have all these new drugs in humans in the next 5 years that are only due to AI that wouldn't have otherwise existed. Development versus repurposing, who's going to have more wins?
Well, you know my answer to that. It's going to be repurposing, of course. But I mean, the reality is that repurposing has been getting wins for years and years. The average drug is approved for between 2 and 3 indications. So drug companies have been finding new indications for years and years and years. But the most striking statistic is that there has not been a single example in all of human history of taking a drug that is already generic and adding a new disease to the label. So what that means is our companies and our system, our medical centers, we are really good about finding 1 or 2 more uses for a drug until it's generic.
Yep.
And once it's generic, we don't find any more uses for that drug.
Absolutely.
And you know what? 80% of all drugs are already generic. And the 20% that aren't generic today, they're all going to be generic in 15 years. So the tools we have, the 4,000 life-saving molecules we have, the vast majority of them, we're not doing any work to find more uses for them. So repurposing has been winning for a long time. We've been finding new uses. But it's only now that we've created a model where rather than one lab, one disease at a time, we can look combinatorial across all drugs and all diseases. We can find those really promising opportunities and move them forward.
Thank you. And Marylyn, I mean, you not only have an incredible body of work yourself, but you look across all these other researchers doing AI research at Penn. And how would you describe sort of this pace, this acceleration, what's changed in the last 6 months to a year?
I would say the biggest shift has been around the large language models and what people are able to use them for kind of in lots of different ways in their research. And just anecdotally, so I got ChatGPT back in 2022. Everybody was using it and went to it and started asking it all sorts of biology and medicine questions. And it was like right some of the time, but wrong most of the time. And I even said, like, what does Marylyn Ritchie do for a living? And it came back with, I have no data on that individual. And I was like, well, Google does. I mean, I can Google myself and find pages. What do you mean you don't have any information? Just last month, I had to write a summary of my career achievements for one of my students was applying for something. And so I was like, let's see if ChatGPT can do it. And I said, can you write a 1,000-word essay on what Marylyn Ritchie has done in her career? And it wrote this beautiful essay. And 80% of it, 90% of it was totally accurate. It had my training, it had what I've been kind of acknowledged for, and then it had a section on something that I've never done in my life. However,
but you might do someday.
I might. I have written about that area in review. Yeah,
if only you'd thought of that first.
Right?
We've gone from deterministic to probabilistic here. So if it's probabilistic, it might happen.
Crystal ball. I've written about that topic in review papers, and I've said that it's a thing people do, but it said I was extremely well known for it. So I think the ability of scientists to use this technology to basically short circuit so much of what we spend time doing. Like, we have a bunch of ideas and we jot them down in our notebooks, or, we take a bunch of notes down. Can you turn this into 3 paragraphs of something useful? And it used to be garbage. Yeah. Now it's written better than I can write myself. Yeah. And so I'm like, it wasn't possible 6 months or a year ago. And today I actually am telling students, like, use one of the chat, GPT, Gemini, Claude, use one of those first. Yeah. Then let's edit together. But go to that, write it, then edit, then give it to me.
Yeah, it's funny because it's not only on the generation side, it's also on the summarization side. And that's why the Gen AI is so good on the back office stuff, like the revenue cycle management, the chart review, all that. It was funny because the company that I was talking about was doing that, was doing care delivery. And one of the things they had built to do care delivery happened to be summarize the thousands of pages of notes that, because I have a new patient coming in who has a complex, history of chronic disease. I have 3 minutes to get ready. There's no way I'm going to ever read that, and it's remarkable. So we've talked about it a bunch of times, so I will just get to it straight off. The trust and safety and fairness issues, right? Like if the consumer of this output doesn't trust it and doesn't act on it, like I said in the sepsis world, you don't change mortality, you don't get the outcome you want. If you have unintended consequences and you've done something that might be good for some people, but you've really impacted equity or fairness in a negative way, that's not great either. what merits attention here? How do you think about these issues? And Walter, you had given almost an answer to some degree in this. There's a transparency element, but like what else? Like how are we going to get to a point where not only is the AI doing incredible things, but it doesn't fall short, right? You actually get the outcomes you want because people trust it, act on it, and we don't have unintended consequences.
Well, I'm happy to jump in on that. I gave, in a conversation earlier today, I gave an example of a huge failure, and I think there are two really important lessons in it. So this work was published probably 4 or 5 years ago now, and it's in the field of using analysis of imaging with AI of dermatology. So a couple of papers came out. There was this really great technology using AI to look at melanomas. And what the paper said is that the AI can identify melanomas better than a dermatologist. And so people were really excited about this. I think there were several startup companies that licensed the technology, and now there are apps on your phone that you can take a picture of a mark and see, is that a melanoma? And it'll give you a probability of how likely that mole is a melanoma. And then kind of fast forward a couple of years, researchers had really dug into the algorithm and published kind of a rebuttal of that work, saying that what that algorithm had identified is the presence of a ruler in the photo. So if you use that app and you took a picture of a piece of fruit, a lemon, it would say melanoma. So what we learned is that dermatologists put a ruler next to a melanoma, and they don't put a ruler next to a mole, because they don't care how big your mole is. It's healthy. It's a mole. They care about the size of your melanoma. So the AI had learned ruler. The other thing that was learned in that process is that the apps didn't work for different skin tones. So all of the training data was very light-skinned skin tone. And so it could differentiate a melanoma from skin or from a mole because of the color differentiation. Yeah. If you're looking at different skin tones, you don't pick that up. And so the two lessons in that, one, it's around kind of ethics and bias. Yeah. What is the training data that we're putting into these algorithms? It's going to learn based off of what we put in. And so we really need to think about, what are the populations we're trying to serve? Are they all represented in the data that we are running our algorithm on? And then the second is, what is the pattern that we're trying to find? So AI is actually not very smart. It is an algorithm that's looking for patterns. We have to think about the patterns we put in front of it. If you put a ruler in, it's going to find the ruler. If you put some marking on an image, it's on only certain images, it's going to learn that. If you feed in data and in this group of patients you capture this and in this group of patients you don't, it's going to pick up what you captured, not actually anything about the disease. So really thinking about who are we trying to serve and what are we trying to learn, and making sure that we've handled all of that.
It makes it feel like you have to do both, pay attention to the inputs and the outputs. So on the input side, it's kind of like you reminding me of women were excluded from RCTs, right? There were no women in an RCT. So we've learned that you have to have good inputs, as part of it. But on the output side, that you might have to start evaluating, by race, for example. Okay, is this good for all skin tones? So on the evaluation side. David or Walter, do you have anything to add on sort of these safety or fairness or trust issues?
Maybe just a quick comment around how Marylyn's point is so well taken, that when AI is sort of on its own, you have to be really careful about the outputs. Certainly, is this melanoma or not? The work that we do, oftentimes humans are in the loop, and I think that it's important to remember that us humans are still important to be in the loop with artificial intelligence for now. And so, sometimes we'll get a high prediction. Remember, we got a high score for imiquimod in cancer called Kaposi sarcoma, and that's interesting, and the mechanism is really strong, and there's this rationale behind it. But imiquimod is a cream, and so unless Kaposi sarcoma is on the skin, you're not going to get imiquimod onto a Kaposi sarcoma. And Kaposi sarcoma can be on the skin, so the algorithm wasn't that off. Yeah. But it's oftentimes not on the skin, and so you need humans, at least for right now, to be evaluating these sorts of things and then helping to improve them.
Yeah, I'll give an example in the radiology space. So it's around detection of disease like pneumothorax, which is a collapsed lung from a chest X-ray. So this is a test that can be accomplished pretty quickly using vision AI models. However, when you look at the performance of these algorithms across demographic groups, men, women, you see reduced performance of the algorithm in women. So it's lower performing. It's not able to detect a collapsed lung as accurately in women and in people over 65 as it is in other groups. So this poses a risk because for a number of reasons. But when you think about these algorithms, the way that they are trained, usually it involves a researcher or a team of researchers at one or a couple institutions, usually on the coast, that are taking data and integrating it to develop their model and train their model. And there needs to be a greater appreciation for bringing in data that comes across the United States, particularly the heartland of the United States, where the types of data and the types of people that are seen using these AI models are different. There has to be a role to include these people in the models that we are building. I think one thing that's interesting about trust is its relationship, I think, with productivity. So one thing I think is that you can trust or not trust an algorithm, but if you feel like it increases your productivity, there will be quick and rapid adoption. And I think that's one of the things that folks are beginning to notice, particularly around AI in general. If you use these tools and they allow you to read more cases more quickly, then you realize a result and you begin to trust it more. And then that encourages other adoption. Other people see that you're able to do more using this tool. They adopt it as well.
You see more cases, but that alone doesn't do the trust. Like, you have to believe that they're accurate, right? And that there needs to be some way to say, is it giving me good information? And that's a design problem, right? Because like, doing the work is one thing, but telling the users or the humans in the loop what they did is a different thing. Right? I mean, this is highly linked to that other question about that last mile problem, right? Like, if the human doesn't act, if the human in the loop doesn't act, the adoption, it's cranking up my productivity, but only if it's good, right?
Well, I think about the field of radiology generally as being one of the most innovative fields in medicine. When I think about how technology gets integrated and adopted by radiologists, I think they, for one, recognize the importance of taking a technology and using it, and they in essence are the ones often building trust in the algorithms. It takes a risk taker to be able to try the algorithm, and then other folks to begin to test and validate whether or not these models are working the way they anticipate, and then adoption and productivity enhancements occur.
Yeah. So, as we come towards the end of the session, I'm gonna speed up a little bit and go into the rapid fire, few sentence responses. Ben was kind in his introduction saying how much my team got done at Penn, and I think that there are things about Penn that I couldn't have done anywhere else. I'm curious to hear from you guys, what is it about Penn or the ecosystem at Penn that enables these kind of breakthroughs in 3 sentences or 4?
All right, I'll go first. I would say, and I've worked at a couple of institutions prior to Penn, what is exceptional is the ability to go from kind of running something like what David talks about, so these AI algorithms to identify some new discovery. Then you can go to the lab and quickly do experiments to validate that finding. And I don't run a wet lab, but there are thousands of people who do. And so depending on if I need a mouse model, a fly model, a cell line, there's someone that does that. And then based on that result, we can go into a first-in-human clinical trial in our health system, because the university, or the School of Medicine and the health system are tightly linked, and we have the same goals. And so that ability to go from research to clinic back to research seamlessly is phenomenal. And the fact that we also have the other schools, so there are 12 schools at Penn, all on one campus. And so it is literally a 10 to 15 minute walk across the street to find an expert in business, an expert in computer science, an expert in engineering. Phenomenal.
Cool. David, what about you?
I completely agree. I think 2 things I would add. One is a really great microcosm of that is something called the Colden Center for Autoimmunity, where we do bring together leaders in AI and wet lab research and clinical research, specifically focused on autoimmunity, but it's a great example where Penn is able to show its strength across all of them. I also would just really lean into Marylyn's point around translational research. There are many amazing academic centers all over the country and the world on the basic science realm and clinical research and translational, certainly. But Penn really stands out. I'm very biased. My life was literally saved at Penn because of translational research. So I'm very biased, I know that. But I don't believe there's any place in the country or the world that's better at translating ideas into actual impact for patients. And a lot of that has to do with the leadership that we have at Penn. A lot of MDs or MD PhDs in leadership roles that are all, even on the basic science side, that are always thinking about how do we translate this really cool basic science concept into patient impact. And so I think those are two things that are really special about Penn.
Walter, anything to add?
Yeah, I totally agree with the leadership aspect of it. I think that a culture of innovation comes through its leadership, and a leadership that is willing, we talked about this, to take a calculated risk on a new opportunity and not just be a receiver of innovation and adoption, but a generator of innovation and adoption. And that culture can only come through leadership. In my own experience, when we have an idea, going to the chair of the department and saying, I want to implement this, I need your help, and them giving you the support you need and the resources you need to be able to implement those tools is awesome.
So
let me just also add, the Penn Medicine Biobank, Marylyn, I thought you were going to mention this, is an incredible resource, and many of the tools that we've developed for AI at Penn have come through the Penn Medicine Biobank as a resource.
No, that's a good add. Let me flip it, particularly for the people in the audience. We have a really nice, robust audience here. So what partnerships or help from outside of Penn would you welcome? What do you want people to come up after the session and talk to you about? So how can others outside of Penn advance discoveries, advance impact? What would you hope for? In any order.
I can jump in while you're
Go ahead,
thinking.
I'm thinking.
So I mentioned earlier that I could get even more excited than my previous answer, and I'll maybe go there. And that's that some of the really promising drug disease matches that we've come across are it's sort of shocking that they're just sitting out there and waiting to be advanced. One of them is a drug called leucovorin for a rare subtype of autism where kids don't get folate to their brain. And if you give them leucovorin, basically this folate deficiency gets corrected and kids start to speak, and a lot of their symptoms they're struggling with improve. This data's been out for almost 8 years from the first randomized controlled trial, but no one's advancing it. An opportunity like that to take a cheap old drug to help kids to speak, what could be more powerful than that? Another one is lidocaine in preventing recurrence from breast cancer, direct injection of lidocaine into tumors, resulting in a 30% improvement in mortality at 5 years. Again, there's no big lidocaine business. You're not going to make any money off selling additional vials of lidocaine, but you can help save hundreds of thousands of lives by advancing opportunities like that. So those sorts of things where our artificial intelligence algorithm, it's not really predicting that these things can be useful, it's uncovering that these things are useful, and it's saying, David, team, Evercure, Penn, like you guys need to do something here. And so we are excited for people who want to partner with us, whether that's CROs that can help to do clinical trials for lower cost, or it's funding to do the studies, or labs to do the work. We just want to take these things that are just waiting for us to take advantage of forward.
Cool. Walter, Marylyn?
Yeah, I can go. Since Walter mentioned the Penn Medicine Biobank, I'm going to talk about that. So the Penn Medicine Biobank is a giant research study that was started about a decade ago. We have about 300,000 of our patients. So Penn sees about 4 million patients in our total catchment, and about 300,000 of them have consented for research. And with that, we get access to their full electronic health record data retrospectively and prospectively. So all of the data, for the last 15 years and everything moving forward, and that includes all their imaging, all their visits. We also have biospecimens, so we are doing some DNA sequencing projects, starting some proteomics projects and other types of genomics. And then we have lots of researchers, like some of us up here, developing algorithms to mine all of those data and try to identify, disease risk prediction, new drug targets, all sorts of things. And so I would say the couple of opportunities are, if you have amazing algorithms and you have a startup and you're looking for good collaborative partners to work together to deploy algorithms in really robust patient populations. We have opportunities for collaboration. If you have interest in, funding projects in that space of people who are developing these algorithms to identify new disease patterns and signatures, we have an amazing data set to do that, and fantastic researchers that are developing those things. They're just living off largely of NIH grants, which is kind of slow and steady. And so I think, opportunities for collaboration either in the funding or in the collaborating and kind of bringing external algorithms to our data would both be welcome.
Walter?
So I mentioned some of the tools that we've deployed in the field of computed tomography for screening patients for disease. Those tools are ready to be scaled up now at Penn Medicine and other hospitals, and we need help doing that scaling. So we're narrowly focused on one type of procedure, which is an unenhanced CT of the abdomen, but there's so much opportunity, but we need help with people who are engineers in cloud compute, folks who can scale these systems to be able to make sure these algorithms can be applied to pretty much all imaging studies that can be performed. And that's an enormous task because we do more than 1 million imaging studies a year, and I'm not including X-ray here, but it would be much larger then. And so we need partners to be able to integrate and try these algorithms and scale them up, and we need ways of taking tools that have been built at Penn, built often off of resources like the Penn Medicine Biobank, and then be able to re-implement them in other hospitals to make sure that they work in a trustworthy and reliable way. And I think, part of the challenge, which goes back to the vision language models, they are enormous consumers of data. They just need tremendous amounts of data, and one hospital is, even as large as Penn Medicine is not going to be able to realize all the data that is needed to make these models as effective and useful as it needs to be. So it needs partners in other hospitals and in industry to bring together these models and develop them off of multi-institutional data in a safe way that protects patient privacy. So this obviously concerns all aspects of technology to be able to de-identify data, de-identify images, de-identify metadata, and then protect patients, and then consider things like the federation of these models so that we're not handing over protected data on our patients to people who will develop models in an unethical way, but that we can realize, and since Penn is the main protector of our own patient data, be able to do that and secure our patient data, yet realize what these models can do.
Of course, we're going to end in 2 minutes. I'm going to do 2 quick lightning round questions where you're limited to one-word answers. One-word answers. I just made these up because I have you guys as a captive audience, and I have, I've known these guys for a while. I have such deep respect for you that I'd never get you as a captive audience. So I get to ask these.
You also know we're verbose. One word.
Yeah, that's true. Hit one word. Now, so there's no doubt, based on what we talked about here and what I know about your work, we are going to get better at sick care. AI is making us much better at sick care. One word, yes or no. Does AI move us upstream to get us better at preventative care?
Yes.
No.
Yeah.
Yes, no, and yes. Okay. This gives us fodder for more conversation afterwards about why you answered it. All right, last question. Look, there's a lot of discussion now. There's no, AI has hype and AI has reality. Lots of discussion about the hype, lots of discussion about the reality. One word answer again. Would you say that AI is currently overhyped or underhyped? Haha, I knew that was going to stuff. Anyone, any order?
I'll use 4. Choo-choo hype train.
Okay, so underhyped.
Underhyped. We need to hype more.
All right.
I think underhyped.
Underhyped. David?
Mildly underhyped.
Mildly. That's 2 words.
Mildly
One word.
Good enough. Well, thank you all for sharing your expertise, your passion for making the world a better place. I am in awe of your work, and it's delightful for me to even get to share a stage with you. Lori, thank you for doing this. And I think we now have...
Before we wrap up, I actually think we could probably take 1 or 2
That's
questions.
where I was going to go. I was going to say, and now, the Q&A.
From the audience.
From the audience. I saw the hand on the right there, under the clock. Yes. No, standing up. Sorry, I saw your hand first.
My name is James. I'm a graduate from Penn Medicine. Worked in a radiology lab, so now fundraising for the investment fund. Something I saw is the difference of expectation in academia versus business. So the question I was going to ask is, how can you balance physicians' focus on long-term research, business professionals need faster results to ensure responsible and
Great question. Shout it out loud. I could do a short version.
How can we balance physician and academics' focus on long-term research with business professionals' need for faster results to ensure responsible AI implementation in healthcare?
Panel?
Thinking.
So I'll take it.
Yeah.
I think we talked a little bit about this as a group, but I think having clinical stakeholders or leaders, people who are deeply familiar with the disease that is being treated, who are willing to take a calculated risk with AI and identify engineers who are they going to work with and industry leaders. And then there has to also be a system of governance around that at the hospital. And that's something that Penn Medicine has recently just implemented.
Yep.
I went to the Radiology Society of North America this year, and there were 600, 700 vendors all promoting an AI product. And so when each one of them is making a pitch to a radiologist at Penn, how are the physicians supposed to be able to deal with this inundation of technology that is coming at them? How can the institution understand what is the important thing that is going to be able to realize the best benefit for their patients?
Can I add one more thing to that?
Yeah.
I think one other thing that needs to happen is we need to kind of shift academia a little bit, and it's one of the things I've seen happen at Penn over the last 5 years. And that's, as an academic, part of your role is kind of building your research program and your reputation as a scientist. And how do you do that? You write lots of papers, and you get lots of grant funding, and you kind of make a name for yourself in your research area. And what we've seen kind of a shift in is, what are you recognized for at your own institution? So it used to be, years ago, and at some institutions it still is, how many papers did you publish? Where were they published? How many grants did you write? How many dollars were those grants? How productive are you? And it's really very kind of metric focused in that way. And that leads to it being kind of slow and steady, and we just have to kind of keep moving the ball inchwise. What we've started to shift to at Penn, and again, I think it speaks to Walter mentioned leadership, is make an impact with the work that you're doing. Well, how do you make an impact? Sometimes that's papers and grants, but sometimes that's filing a patent that then gets licensed. Sometimes that's going out into the community and doing some sort of community, outreach work. Sometimes that is, writing a book. So how we take our discoveries into the world can be different impacts. And so I think the more that academia thinks about how does the business world work, if we're making discoveries that we think are going to change the world, we can't just write 4 more papers about it. We need to find a partner that can help us push it out into the world faster.
Yeah, and I love both those answers. I was going to add an answer myself, which is that we've always had these different funding sources with different time frames. Right? You have government, NIH, NSF funding. You have foundations. You have corporate. You have venture. And those are different funding sources with very different expectations of time frames. And I think you had to marry that to what you said, Marylyn, is I think a lot of universities are developing different career tracks. Mm-hmm. And the different career tracks can have different types of incentives, which also have different time frames. Mm-hmm. So as a portfolio, you still might have people who are working on things 20 years out, and thank God for things like, mRNA vaccines, right? It's going to have a long development, and it's going to have traditional NIH, NSF behind it is the way I think of it. And thank God for things that are super rapid deployment, because the world needs change right now, more in the corporate time frame. Mm-hmm. That would be the way I say it.
Good question.
Okay. Well, in light of the time, I think it's probably best for us to, again, thank our panel and our moderator. And we can continue the conversation during the networking after the session. It's very clear that each of them, everyone on this stage, has about 100 ideas that they're ready to implement. And I just wanted to reinforce the fact that PCI is here to facilitate all of these partnerships. It's obviously a very exciting time at Penn with all of this amazing work going on. Thank you to them for joining us here. I also just wanted to highlight, outside we have a list of all of the startups, or most of the startups at Penn that we're kind of aware of at the moment, raising capital. So feel free to grab anyone at PCI or to contact us. This will be posted on our website. We're always looking for partners and investors in our startups and our technologies and our faculty. And I just also wanted to thank our sponsor and invite them to provide our last word today. We certainly could not do this without them. And Dominga Silva, who I think leads the IP practice now.
Hi, everybody. I'm Domingo Silva. I'm a life science patent attorney with Saul Ewing, based in Philadelphia. I have to insert some comment about the Eagles here, so go Birds.
Birds.
Yes.
Yes.
So we are the proverb. I'm the proverbial last person between you and the food. So I'm going to be brief. I like to say that we feel very honored to be able to work with the researchers at Penn. We represent several faculty members there, and here I have my colleague Justin Crotty, who is also a life science patent attorney. One of the most rewarding elements of this work is basically benefiting from the enthusiasm of the faculty at Penn, who are eager not only to make new discoveries, but also translate them into treatments. And we feed off that kind of energy. I'd like to point out that we have participated in this event for many years, and every year the technology is completely different. Penn has such a big wealth of knowledge and technology that's just waiting to be translated into the real world. And the plus side about Penn is that you get to interact with a great group at PCI, so it's all positive. And on a personal level, I must say I'm such a big fan of Penn Medicine that I'm even married to one of the faculty members. So I highly recommend
That's commitment.
it.
That's real commitment.
So I think that's the end of the program. So everybody's welcome to have some wine and have some food and have some conversations.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
It's fun.
That was great, David.
Yeah, you're awesome.